Boker Tov. Today's daf is daf Lamed Beis in Bava Metzia. As we learn from Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael and the Sunbat Sarva Shivya, we also learn from Eli Neshama, my grandfather Yechiel Meir ben David, whose yahrzeit is today Chaf Beis, Chaf Aleph, daf Lamed Beis. Today's date is Chaf Aleph Adar Beis. Says the Mishnah on daf Lamed Beis and Ralph. Matzav Arefes. Let's say you find an animal that was lost. Right, talking about. We've been discussing the issue of lost animals or lost other items, but here specifically about an animal. You find them in a barn, and you're not mechayev to return it. Presumably, it's not lost. The owner left them there. What's the chiddush? And I think Gemara will explain the details. But if you found him then you have to return it. If you found him the owner wouldn't leave him there stam. But the Gemara is going to qualify these. Basic. If the animal, again, we had this Gemara before mentioning this Mishnah. If the animal was in a cemetery and you're a Kohen, obviously you shouldn't become tamei for this to return the item, because we said it's an assay of hashev tashiv. Even though there's a lo tucha lasam along with it, it's still an essay against a los assay and essay. The los assay is nefesh lo yitama and kedoshim you, that your Kohen is not allowed to become tamei. Let's say his father told him to violate the Torah and become tamei. Would you listen to your father to do it, even if you're going to listen to father? No. Or your father says to it in a regular case, you're supposed to return this item. Your father tells you don't return it. Lo yishma, you shouldn't listen to him. Now, of course, you shouldn't listen to him. Your father's telling you to go against the Torah. Why would you think you should listen to him? The Gemara will explain.
What if it's your initiator?
Yeah.
Yesterday's
Parak B'Tan. Yeah. Okay. You have a mitzvah to listen to your father. On the other hand, you have a mitzvah of it's a say of kibbut avayim does not trump an assay and a los assay. The los assay here is don't ignore the lost item. So S is the halosay, but it's not doch and los assay and an assay, because here you have don't ignore it and you must return it. So isn't it obvious that you shouldn't listen to your father? Gemara will explain all this. Parak B'Tan. We all have this. This was also mentioned in the previous Gemara. Let's say Parak B'Tan. Let's say you unloaded the animal, right? You have a mitzvah. We're going to talk about this in more detail. There's two mitzvahs in the Torah. In Parak Chaf Beis, in Parak Chaf Gimel in Shmos, it says if you run into your animal, and if you run into your enemy's animal, and he's wandering in the road, he's lost in the road, you have to return it to him, right? You have to return it to him. Then it also says, you have to return his animal. And then it says that's, if you lost animal. Then it says if you see if you see the donkey of your enemy, your hated one, right? Your person you hate, if he's lying under his burden, right? He can't move. The animal's in distress. You shouldn't stop from helping him. You should certainly help him. This is the mitzvah of prika. If you see an animal, foundering under a burden, he can't handle it. The animal is lying under the burden. You should help him and take the burden off the animal. Help him out. Is this a proof that Sar Balachayim, relieving the suffering of an animal, is d'oraisa? That's going to be a discussion in the Gemara today. But that's what the pasuk says in Shmos. In Dvarim, it says something similar. It says Lo sira es chamor achicha o shoro nofim badecha. They're falling on the road to salamta and turn away from them. You should help him load it. In other words, if the animal is fallen on the ground and his load fell off, you should help him load. So again, in Shmos, we're talking about prika, about unloading him, help him, because he's loaded up, he's under the burden. And in Dvarim, it talks about loading him up. If he fell down and the load has fallen, you should help him load up. So we're talking about unloading in Shmos and loading in Dvarim. So now let's say you unloaded him, and then you help him load it, and you unload him again, and every time he kept falling, he couldn't handle it. It doesn't make any difference how many times you do it. You're chayiv shenemar azov ta'azov. As we saw in yesterday's Gemara, azov ta'azov doesn't mean just do it twice. It just means help him no matter what. Now you have to help the animal. Let's say the owner stood aside and said, you know what? mitzvah, you have a mitzvah to help my animal. If you want to do it, you want to become mitzvah, unload him. I'm not going to help you. You have a mitzvah too, right? You don't have to do it. Shneimar imo, right? Pasuk says, help him with help the owner with him. Again, help the owner unload the animal. The owner can't handle it himself. If the owner doesn't want to help, doesn't want to do it, you have no obligation. Let's say the owner of the animal was an elderly person or sick and he couldn't do it, then you're chayiv. In other words, you're only chayiv to help him if the owner wants to do it, unless the owner can't handle it himself, he's sick or old or whatever.
The owner can't handle himself, is it a different mitzvah or the same?
Same mitzvah, but the emo is only if you can do it. Only if you're capable of doing, like anything. If you're not capable of doing, you can't do it, You can't put on film because you don't have an arm, you can't do it. It's, we're talking about, Moshe was asking me about mitzvahs that are done in Eretz Yisrael. If you live in Chutzlaretz, you have a mitzvah to do re'iyah or other mitzvahs, olas re'iyah, etc. It's clear, if you can't do it, you can't do it, but there's still an obligation. If you did an Aveira in Los Angeles and you have to bring a chatos for that, if you can't make it because you have no way of getting here, you can't do it, but there's still an obligation. Mitzvah Torah lifro. Now, the Mishnah says that it's only a mitzvah in the Torah to unload, but not to load. Now, this is strange. We just said that there's two mitzvahs. One is to unload and one is to help load. So what do we mean by that? We'll see. Shimon Aflit, and there's even mitzvah to be even to load. The Gemara is going to explain this Mishnah. Rabbi Yosef Glili Omer, he has a new thing. He says, Imaya. What's the next word? Alav. Yeah, my Gemara is missing that word. Imaya love. Yes, Maso. If there was too much, in other words, if he was the animal was overloaded, there was too much on there. Ein zakaklo. You're not obligated. Under its load, a burden which he can handle. In other words, if the owner loaded the animal with too much, then it's the owner's fault. Then you have no obligation there. So again, it says under its load, but it's got to be a load that he can handle. Tachas maso. If he's overloaded, that's not your responsibility. Then it's not your fault, and you can't handle it. Okay, you don't have to handle it. Amarava. Back to the beginning of the Mishnah, it said if you find him in a barn. The barn that we're talking about is a barn that does not encourage the animal to leave. For example, if let's say it was too hot in there or there wasn't any food, that wouldn't be encouraging the animal to leave. So where do we say that if you find him in a barn, you don't have to return him because the owner put him there? That's only if it's a barn where the animal will not run away from there because he has no food or it's too hot or too cold or whatever. The Mishmeres also doesn't guard him. The door's unlocked. Doesn't guard him from leaving. Then that's what we're talking about. Einamata. How do we know? In a case like that, you don't have to return him because he can handle it there. Even though he's not guarded, his door is open, but there's no reason for him to leave. Einamata. It's not forcing him to leave or encouraging him to leave. You're not chayiv to return it because he's okay where he is. But it's also not guarding him. Why do you have to say if you find an animal in a locked barn, obviously it belongs to the owner, he's got him there. Why would you even think so? The fact that you have to say you're not chayiv is because the animal could escape if he so desired. The circumstances, the environment does not incite him to leave, but he could leave. Okay, that's what we're speaking about. If it's guarded, Malach, we said if you find him outside, you can bring him inside. And we said inside means not even in his house, in his garden, in his structure, whatever. There, so boy, certainly if you find him inside, you don't have to do anything. If you found him outside, it's enough to put him inside the barn. So if he's already inside the barn, of course you don't have to do anything. We're talking about where it's not locked. So the barn is not locked, but he could stay there. There's no reason why the animal would have to leave. Therefore, you don't have to do anything. You're not obligated to turn your attention to try to turn the animal. Yeah. Well, again, it's in a barn. We don't care who owns the barn. He's in a locked barn. Doesn't have to. Again, you're looking constantly legally who owns the barn. It doesn't make it. He could be in a public barn. Doesn't make any difference. Doesn't make any difference. But he's guarded. He's in a place where he's not lost. We don't care who owns it. Maybe he's in his friend's barn. He doesn't, you don't know. You see him in a barn. The question is, do you have to make an obligation to go to find the owner, etc.? No. If he's in a barn and he's okay there, even if the barn, he could get out, the door is like unlocked, but you're not obligated. You're not obligated to return it because you assume that the owner left him there.
The barn.
Doesn't make any difference when it's the barn.
So I just call him up and say.
No, you're not obligated at
"You
all.
have a lock on your
You're
barn."
not obligated.
Right.
That's the point. You're not obligated for that. The animal is fine where he is. He's in a barn, that's fine. Now we had even more. That's only if the barn is within the city limits, within 2,000 amos outside city. We talk about if you find Rosh Hashanah, you are rechayev to turn it. I feel nami chayev, because we're saying over here, if the animal, let's say the barn is in the middle of a desert, 1,000 miles away, then the animal's lost because, he just found he found the structure to hide in there for a little bit, but he's really lost. So where do we say if you find him inside a barn, inside a stable, you're not obligated if he's within the city limits, let's say. But when we talk about Rosh Hashanah, you have to return him. It's mashma even within the city limits because we're talking about within the city limits. It's within the city limits of Rosh Hashanah, you have to return him. In the city limits inside a stable, you don't have to return him. Some say that differently. The Masnei HaSefer, Rosh Hashanah, Chayeba, in Rosh Hashanah, you have to return him. You're obligated to return him. Or maybe it's like that's only if he's outside the city limits. If he's inside the city limits, even Rosh Hashanah, the owner might have had him there walking around. So it's only chayiv outside the city limits. Mashma that in a barn, even if it's in the middle of the desert, 1,000 miles away, but it's in a structure that doesn't encourage him to leave and also doesn't prevent him from leaving, you're not responsible to. So depending on how you learn the case of the Mishnah, are we talking about chutz tchum or inside the tchum? That would be the halacha, whether you have to turn it or not. But it doesn't depend on who owns the barn. It depends on the circumstances of how the barn is structured, meaning that it doesn't encourage him to leave and also doesn't prevent him from leaving. But where is the barn? You could learn that the barn is within the city limits, but outside the city limits, you would have to return him. Or the economists should say no, even that it's only economy. The economy says that only if he's within the city limits. Even if it's outside the city limits, you're not mechuyev to return him. That is, we're only talking about within the city limits. Within the city limits in Rosh Hashanah, you have to return him. Within the city limits in a barn, you don't have to return him. But outside the city limits, you always have to return him.
How much effort do you have to put into doing something? It could be very far away.
Yeah. So then would depend. We learned the other day that if your cost is going to be so great that he's going to have to reimburse you a substantial amount of money more than the animal is worth. Well, the effort is only measured in terms of cost. It's only measured in terms of cost. Any effort is necessary. If there is absolutely no cost to you, you have a mitzvah to return it. There's not a question. You have the obligation to return it, no matter what the effort is. You have to schlep him. You have to take the animal, feed him for a while, take care of him, get him back to his owner. The basic first law yitamelav. If you find him in a cemetery and you're a Kohen, you're not obligated. So that part's pretty obvious, right? But let's say his father told him to do it. Now you're not supposed to go to the basic first. Let's say your father told him, like you said, your father told him you go in and you return it. Oh, or it could be that Imam al-Itame is not even a case of returning. Your father just told him to go into the cemetery, right? Well, again, it's a mitzvah kibbut avayim against the mitzvah of the Torah, kedoshim yiyu and menefesh lo yitam ba'amo. Osha amarlo, or his father al tachser, don't return a lost item. Don't bother returning it. I'm telling you, the Torah says return. I said, don't bother. Come and help me. You shouldn't listen to your father. You're supposed to fear your parents, but my Shabbos comes first. You're all responsible to help me. So if I tell you to do something, you don't listen to your parents if they counter what I said. Wait. So I need that pasuk to tell me that you don't listen to your parents. Why? Because God tells you, if I tell you otherwise, you listen to me. I think you should listen to your father. Why? Why? Here you have an assay of against the los assay and an assay of returning the item. Below Asi Ese, B'Doch Losa B'Ese, and Ese cannot be Doch Losa Seven Ese. So why would I think you could do that? This no, I still need the pasuk. Why? Again, it's a special exception here. Yes, normally an assay is not tochalos sheish bakaris. An assay is not tochalos assay together with an assay. If the los assay is an assay accompanying it, again, the los assay that accompanies the first assay doesn't do anything. But assay is not tochalos assay assay. But over here, I might think that this assay of kibbut avaim is stronger than them. It's a special case. Why? Because it is compared to the covenant of Hashem. Shema says, that possibly we know. But Neman also says in Mishlei, Kabed is Hashem mehoicha, honor Hashem from your assets. So it says Kabed es Avicha, and it says Kabed es Hashem. Now it says, since it's Hukash, Rashi tells you though that the Hukash quoted is B'Gzever Shava. Hukash just means a comparison. Now, usually the hekesh means it's a juxtaposition in the same pasuk or next to one. Now that's hekesh, but hekesh also can mean a comparison. Here you see, look at Rashi, right? Even with Gilyon Shas, hukesh kvod, big zera shava. The hekesh is with the zera shava because it says kabed ismecha. You see also here a hekesh between a pasuk in the Torah and a pasuk in Nach, right? Because it's between a pasuk in kabed ismecha, which is in Shmos and in Dvarim, and kabed Hashem Halcha is a pasuk in Mishlei. So I might think, again, because this is a special case, you should listen to Hashem, you should listen to your parents just like you listen to Hashem, and therefore you would say, you should listen to your father. You don't listen. Why? Because it says you have to fear your parents, but that's only under the condition that they are observing my mitzvah of Shabbos, etc., that they're telling, listen to me, like if your father tells them Chal Shabbos, no, your father's chayav to listen to me also, therefore he can't go against me. You're supposed to listen to your parents in all matters except for things that counter my mitzvos. So that's the point over here. So whether your father tells you if you're a Kohen, your father tells you go into the cemetery, I want you to come to this levaya, you don't listen to him. Or if your father tells you don't fulfill the mitzvah of Shabbos Aveda, you don't listen to him. Mitzvah Torah lifrok avalodit. Now we're going to get into Prika and Tina, right? About unloading and loading. So there's a mitzvah, the Mishnah says mitzvah to unload, but not to load. What are you talking about? We just brought down two psukim. Shmos is Prika, Dvarim is Tina. What do we mean over here? My avaloliton, ile ma avaloliton, you don't have to load at all. My Prika, why is it different than Prika unloading of Sivazov Tasov in Shmos? When it comes to loading, also it says the mitzvah in Dvarim. It says to help them load. Ela mitzvah min Torah lifrok bechinam. What he means is this: the mitzvah, of course, it's a mitzvah to load also, but the mitzvah of unloading is even for free. In other words, you see an animal there in distress under a load, you have to unload it even if you don't get paid. The Tanna Kama says, but to load him, yes, there's a mitzvah to load him, but you can demand payment for your time. You're loading, right? El b'schar. That's what he means over here. There's no mitzvah to unload. There's no mitzvah to load. There's no mitzvah to load for free. You're supposed to do this to load, and you can demand payment. Rav Shimon Omer, aflitim bechinam. Rav Shimon says also, no, the loading is also for free. The mitzvah is to unload, both unload and load for free. Tani, Tanin this that we learned in the Mishnah is a proof that we learned in this price. At the Tanna Rabbanan, that's what Tanna Kama says. Rav Shimon Omer both of them are free. What's the Rabbanan's reasoning? Why they say you can get paid for loading? Very simple. Rav Shimon be like Rav Shimon who says they're both for free. Why does it have to say both load and unload? What would logic tell you you should do first? The animal's in distress, the owners unload. Unload makes sense. So if it'd be like a Shimon that they're both are free, if both are free, why does it have to tell you to unload? Just say you have to load, and I'll know for Kavachomer loading. He's like Shimon, let it just say loading. The little boy Prika, you don't have to say unload. Banamina, I will say Matina, let's bait Sar Balchaim. Marach what? Loading where the animal's not under distress. The load is off the animal, the load is on the floor. And there's no tsar balachayim, but and also the owner is not losing an animal. The animal's not broken down under the load. So marach what loading where there's no tsar balachayim and there's no loss. Still, your chayiv is still chayiv to load him. So prika unloading this big tsar balachayim, the animal's in distress, but chisar and kiss, and the owner is losing his animal. His animal is dying over here. Low koshke, certainly you should do it. So why did it say both? Let it just say you should load an animal if his load fell off, the burden fell off. And I'll know certainly you should unload. Why did the Torah tell us also that you should help unload? To tell you that the two mitzvahs over here, unloading is even for free. Te'ina is b'schar, and that you have to load for free. If they're both free, just tell me you have to load. I wouldn't know automatically unload. So why does Reb Shimon say both are free? Reb Shimon, my time, that's a good kal v'chomer, right? What do you have to say both for? If they're both free, just tell me loading, and I'll certainly know unloading. It says because the psukim are not explicit. When you learn these words, azov, what does azov mean? Azavon is a will, right? It's an inheritance. You leave something. So it's a bequest, right? Right. So the word itself, you can't tell what that means. Here in this context, it means help him, right? Right. Where do we have it by Al Kain Yazav Ishas Avav Imo, right? You said I went to darshan it that way at somebody's Sheva brachas, when they were having difficulty with parents. I said, it says, Azov, that's when you should leave your parents, but it doesn't mean leave your parents. Right? The pasuk sometimes says, leave your parents and stay with your wife, right? But don't leave your parents entirely. Azov, still help your parents like you help the animal, right? So, my time, Mishum Delo Messiah Mikroy, because the pasuk's not explicit. It says, Azov to Azov, okay, we don't know which one's which. And therefore, if I'd only have one, I would say, fine, that means unloading. I wouldn't know loading, so I have to tell me both. Why do you say that the psukim are not explicit? In the first pasuk in Shmos, where it talks about unloading, it says the animal is lying under its burden. That means you have to unload it. So there it says, no flim baderach, they fell on the road. The ramu inu b'tunai burcha. Both the animal and the load is laying on the ground. Reb Shimon says, no flim also. No flim baderach inu v'teinu alayim mashma. No flim baderach could also mean fell on the road, and the load is still on him. So the psukim are not so explicit. That's Reb Shimon's idea. Amrava. Okay, so that's how you darshan the psukim over here. We're not quite done with the Mishnah, but we're getting off now into the topic of Tzar Balachayim, which Rav Asher has said many times. It's one of those mitzvahs that are min Torah, but it's not one of the Targum mitzvahs. Rav Asher says that we're going to see it's a machlokas here. Is Tzar Balachayim doraisa or not? Are you allowed to suffer? For example, if I could poison those cats in my backyard, I would. But the reason I don't is because of this mitzvah. You're not allowed to cause suffering to animals. So you can kill them like shchita, but that doesn't cause any suffering. But suffering you can't do. So, but even if you hold that it's a doraisa, it's not a pasuk. It's not one of the Targum mitzvahs. It's learned out, but it's not what. There's certain things that are doraisas, but they're not what a Targum mitzvahs. That's what Rav Asher explains many times. Shahir Amarava. Different shneim from both the Chacham and Reb Shimon, even Reb Shimon, Nilma, we can see that Tzar Balachayim is a Raisa. Why? Because he said, listen, why don't just say Te'ina, just right, if they're both the same, just say you must load the animal, and certainly I'll know unloading, because they're the Tzar Balachayim. What's the Kabbalah if there's no Tzar Balachayim? Yes, Tzar Balachayim is a Raisa. If Reb Shimon, even Reb Shimon, when he says that they're both free, Lo Kamer El Mishum Lo Mishum, his only reasoning why he had both psukim is because you can't tell from the words. It's not explicit. Abu Masani would be explicit. Dashin, he would say the Kal V'chomer. He would say, listen, if you're chayav for Tina, certainly you should chayav for unloading. Why? 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 Lab Mishum Tzar Balachayim. Mishum Tzar Balachayim. Because Tzar Balachayim is min Torah. That's why he darshans the way they darshan the psukim the way they do. Right? From both words of the Chacham and Reb Shimon, you see that Tzar Balachayim is a Raisa. So the Gemara says, no. Who says this? Who says that the Kal V'chomer is because the animal's in distress? Maybe the Kal V'chomer is because the guy is losing money. What do you mean losing money? If his animal is falling under a burden there and dying and cracking his ribs, right? That's the Chasar Kis. Madach over there, Madach where the animal is not under distress, where the load is on the ground. You must help him load, even though there's no loss to the owner over here, right? Certainly where there's a loss to the owner, so you should do it. Maybe that's the Kal V'chomer. Dilma Mishabdika Chasar Kis. This is the Kal V'chomer. Ma'te'ina. Madach loading blessed by Chasar and Kiss. There's no loss to the owner. The animal's fine, and the load's on the ground. Chayiv, you're still chayiv to help him. Prika, unloading. This by Chasar and Kiss. The animal might die. He's under distress over here. Low Kolshkin, certainly you should help. Even though maybe Tzar Balachayim is not men Torah. Maybe it's only a drabana, and Tzar Balachayim is not a nice thing to do. Shouldn't hurt God's creatures. But it's not the right. The Kal V'chomer is because of loss to the owner. Right? Says more of a Tina Ein B'Chasar Kis, who says that loading, when it comes to loading, there's no loss to the owner. Maybe there's a loss to the owner. There's a loss to the owner because his load is on the ground and he can't make it to the market. He's going to miss market day. Or if the stuff's laying on the ground, these trucks where you see everything's laying on the highway fell off, he's going to lose his stuff if the animal can't be loaded up. So there's loss to the owner there too. So there's a loss either way. The Kal V'chomer therefore must be from Tzar Balachayim. Tated Tzar B'chayim D'oraisa. I'll show you another proof that Tzar B'chayim D'oraisa. You can't say the Sefer is basically Yomer. The end of the Mishnah says what? The reason says if the animal was overloaded, you're not obligated to help him. You're not obligated to help him because the animal wasn't being treated properly in the first place. It was too much of a load. You can't overload the animal. Doesn't tell you, well, if it's overloaded, maybe you should load it a little bit. The load is too heavy. Let's assume it was one big box of stuff. So since Rabbi Yossi Glili says there, he says if it's overloaded, you don't have to help him. Tanakama says you do have to help him. You do have to help him, even if it's only loaded. My time, the Lab Mishum, that Tzar Balachayim is D'oraisa. In other words, he says you have to help him either way. Meaning, if the animal is overloaded, basically he says, if he overloaded his animal, you don't have to unload it. It's like the owner was killing his own animal. So so the Rebbe says, if it's overloaded, you don't have to help him. Mashma Tanakama says, if it's overloaded, the animal's still in distress. Forget about the owner. The owner's a jerk for overloading his animal, right? He doesn't care about his animal. He doesn't care about his horses or whatever, right? But you have an obligation anyway to help him unload. Maybe you shouldn't load it, but you should help him unload it because the animal's in distress. And that's what the Tanakh says. Isn't it because Tzar Balachayim is a Raisa? No, Dilma B'tachas Masal. Maybe they're simply arguing about the pasuk. Rabbi Yossi says you're only obligated to help him unload if it's a normal load, not overloaded. Rabbanan say we don't darshan that way. You have an obligation to unload an animal. We don't care how heavy, how big the load was, loaded or overloaded, not because of Tzar Balachayim. Simply that's your obligation. Now the Gemara says the other way. Tated Tzar Balachayim is lav d'oraisa. I'll tell you a proof that Tzar Balachayim is not d'oraisa. The Ikani Reisha says halach v'yashav lo. Let's say the owner says, oh, there's a pasuk, that I learned the Chumash. You have to help me unload my animal, right? So I'm going to sit over here. I'm going to have a smoke and have lunch. You unload the animal. Since you have a mitzvah, since you have a mitzvah, unload the animal, right? Potter, you don't have to shnemar imo with him. If you have an obligation to help an animal in distress, what's the difference if the owner is a jerk and says, I'm having lunch, I'm going to have a smoke, you unload my animal? What's the difference? You still have to worry about the animal, right? You have an obligation there. LMI, since you see that if the owner doesn't want to partake and help you, you don't have to help him. Mashma that Tzar Balachayim is not the Raisa. No, the Gemara says no, that's not a proof. La'olam Tzar Balachayim is the Raisa. Misav is potter. Who says you're entirely potter? Dilma potter b'chinim chay b'schar. Maybe what he means is that if the owner doesn't want to partake, you don't have to help him for free, but you can demand payment if he doesn't want to help you. Maybe that's what it means. When the owner wants to help you unload his animal, then you should help him even for free. If he doesn't want to help you, you can demand payment, but you still have to unload the animal. So we can see the proofs. There's proof both ways whether Tzar Balachayim is the Raisa or Rabbanan. Rava said, you see both the Tanakh of Shimon that Tzar Balachayim is the Raisa. Let's bring a proof to Rava from this case. Let's say an animal belongs to a guy. The pasuk says, if your animal, the animal of your hated one, we'll see, but if your fellow Jew is falling under the burden, you have to help him. You have to unload him. What about an animal of a guy? The animal belongs to a guy. You have to deal with it K'beis Yisrael, just like an animal of a Jew. Yeah, if Tzar Balachayim is the Raisa, K'beis Yisrael, because Tzar Balachayim is for any animal. It doesn't mean if it belongs to a Jew or belongs to a guy. Tzar Balachayim is lav d'oraisa. Why do you have to deal with it? If it's not the Raisa, it's only Rabbanan. So why would the Rabbanan necessarily say that you have to treat the animals of Goyim like you do of a Jew? The answer is yes. Because of friendliness, you shouldn't cause problems. Why are you only helping the animals of Jews and not the animals of Goyim? You should help the animals of Goyim also, even if it's Rabbanan. Right? Even Tzar Balachayim is the Raisa. You want to say it's only Rabbanan? No, could very well be Tzar Balachayim is the Raisa. If you say tzar balchayim is a raisa, why do you have to handle it? If it's not the raisa, why would you have to handle like land with Jew? Maybe you don't deal with it if it's not the raisa. Maybe it's only on Jewish animals, not on non-Jewish animals or animals belonging to Jews. Morris says no. I'll tell you that it is that tzar balchayim is only drabanan. And the reason you have to handle that of a goy, unload the animal of a goy, is because of Eva, to live in peace with them, not to have any fights.
What's the happening to say that Tzar Balchayim should only apply to the Jewish animals? Like why do we have to come on to Eva?
Yeah.
Tzar Balchayim is you're not supposed to, the cat's in your
Okay.
backyard.
So if it's the oraisa,
even if it's Rabban,
well, why would the Rabbanan only do it there?
the cat's in your backyard. Why
Yeah.
are you worried then?
Right. Right.
Eva, there's no Eva.
Right.
Maybe
Yeah.
maybe
Maybe that's only where the Rabbanan would have only made a rule. The Rabbanan made a rule because of Eva, because if it didn't belong to the pasuk says, because the pasuk says Sona Achan, and we darshan that as a Jewish one. And the pasuk in Dvarim, it says clearly, it says Lasios Chamor Achicha. Achicha. So there, it's apparently we're talking about loading, opposed to unloading, but still you see that the pasuk Minatorah, it's only on a fellow Jews. That's all we're talking about. Now, why don't we darshan from there that but here still the Mishnah says that the behemoth of a goy you have to handle. If you say it's tzar balchayim is the raisa, so you could say fine. It's talking about maybe loading doesn't involve tzar balchayim. It's the unloading. So the oyivcha that we're talking about in Shmos doesn't say achicha over there, right? So there it doesn't say achicha. So maybe that applies to a goy too. If it's the raisa, we can understand tzar balchayim is a raisa doesn't make any difference. But if it's rabbanan, perhaps the rabbanan only made a rule by Jews and not by that of a goy. The answer is the rabbanan made a rule because of Eva. If it's rabbanan, it's rabbanan. The whole tzar balchayim is only rabbanan. So why would they even make an effort? It's when the Rabbanan say there is no mitzvah tzar balchayim. You can cause animals to suffer. You can cause animals to suffer. So, but they said minaraisa you could, but the rabbi said you shouldn't. But maybe they would only make the logic would say I would only do it for Jews. Why do I have to help goyim? Why do I have to help goyim? Because we want to be nice to animals. We have good animals. But the Torah didn't mechayiv that. And as if the Rabbanan were saying it because the Torah didn't mechayiv that, why would the Rabbanan add something like that? Probably because of Jewish property, not because of non-Jewish property. So the Gemara says no, even if the truth is it could be Rabbanan. And the reason why you must treat an animal of a goy properly is simply because of friendship, to live normally with them, not to cause fights. It's mistaver that way, that it's only Rabbanan. The Tani Maisa Tuna Yayin Usr. Let's say the animal was loaded up with goyish wine. Wine that was used for Portazar, right? Yayin Nesach, let's say. Yayin that's Usr, Yayin Stam or Yayin Nesach. Ain't Zakli, you're not obligated to. Why? If you say that the mitzvah to unload an animal is not the rice, it's only Rabbanan. The rabbi said, fine, you should help a regular Jewish one. Don't help in a case where the wine is also. We can understand that. If it's the raisa because of the tsar of the animal, am I in Sakikla? Just unload it anyway. So it must be that it's on Rabbanan, because you say if it's unloading non-kosher wine, you don't have to do it. Maybe it means this. Ulatina yayin aser and zakufla. Maybe it really is the raisa, and you should unload it. It means that to load it, if you want to reload the non-kosher wine, that you don't have to do. But unloading it, which involves sar balchayim, maybe that would be the raisa. So you can see it both ways. Tashma. So the Hochanam Mistaver is not there, but you could say Eva. In other words, it works. It works both ways. You can slug up the proof ways. Tashma another proof. So let's say the animal is a guy. It's a goyish animal, or belong to. When I say goyish animal, it means obviously belong to a guy. Umasa Yisrael, but the load he was schlepping stuff for Jews. V'chadalta. So the pasuk is v'chadalta. It says you could stop. So it says you should help, but he dashes v'chadalta, meaning there you don't have to help him. Yamar tzar balchayim daraisa. If tzar balchayim is menatora, am I v'chadalta? Why do you say v'chadalta? Zov tazav miboyle. You should help him. It says you shouldn't see your animal and stop, but rather you should help him. So he says, "V'chadalta" means you should stop. Why? If what's the difference? If it's a goyish animal and there's a tsar balachayim involved because it's overloaded, you should help him anyway. Why do you say since it's a goyish animal, you don't have to help him? Why? Why would you say that? If you tsar balachayim is daraisa, why do you say that you don't have to help him? You have to help him anyway. Zlom tsar balachayim is daraisa. Again, the hosam b'te'ina. There we're talking about loading, not unloading. Now the Gemara is going to ask the obvious kasha. The chadalta azov tazavim is really said by unloading, not by loading. So what kind of an answer is that? But before the Gemara even gets to that, talking about loading. Loading you don't have to do. Say what about the reverse? The animal belonged to a Jew, and the load was a load of a goy. Azov tazov, right there, it says azov, you have to help him. If you're talking about loading him, azov tazov, why do you have to help him? If the load is a load of a goy, why do you have to help him? If that's what you say for talking about loading, the answer is Mishum Tzar Yisrael, because the animal belonged to Israel, and he's not getting paid, as you're waiting over there. You have to as he's just waiting, and his truck is not making any money because it's idle right now. That's the point. Mishum Tzar Yisrael. So in the Reisha also, you should say because of the tsar of the Yisrael whose load is there, or maybe the Yisrael is driving the animal, you should also say you should help. Why do you say that if it's a behemah v'chavim and a mas Yisrael, you don't have to help him? I feel Reisha Nami says Reisha b'chamar v'cham. The Reisha we're talking about where the driver is a goy. So say and sefer b'chama Yisrael. My piskus. How do you know that? How do you know that you're talking about the animal of a goy? You didn't talk about how do you know the animal of a goy is driven by a goy and the animal of a Jew is driven by a Jew? The stam and milsa usually inish basachamri also. The man goes according to his animal. Meaning, if the truck is owned by a guy, he's probably a goyish driver. If the animal's owned by a guy, it's probably a goyish driver, and reverse for a Jew. But here's the real kasha. How can you say over here again? The first case we're talking about, behemoth belonged to a guy, and the load was the debt of Israel. You don't have to help him. Why not? Why not? If Tzar Balachayim is daraisa, you should have to help him. If Tzar Balachayim, it must be that Tzar Balachayim is not daraisa. So you said no. It says we're talking about loading, but that pasuk b'chaldata is talking about unloading, and there's Tzar Balachayim there. If you say your answer was it's loading, so there's no Tzar Balachayim. We're not talking about Tzar Balachayim, but the pasuk is talking about unloading. The civic, Amalei, Hamani, you're right. So how do you deal with that? The pasuk's talking about unloading, and the Mishnah says, or the Brisa says, if the animal belongs to a goy, you are not obligated to help him. Why are you not obligated to help him? Tzar B'chaim Zaraisa must be Tzar B'chaim Zarabanan. What's your answer? We're talking about loading? No, we're talking about the pasuk's talking about unloading. The pasuk of Azov Tazov and Chadalta is unloading, where the animal is loaded and there's Tzar B'chaim. All right, that Brisa is Rabbi Yosei Glili. Rabbi Yosei not in our Mishnah. Rabbi Yosei Glili who says Tzar B'chaim is not Torah. There's clearly a machlokes in the Gemara. Tzar B'chaim is the Raisa. Rabbi says it's the Raisa. Rabbi Yosei Glili says it's not the Raisa. It's a Tana. Says it's not the Raisa. That's his shita. Tashma. Let's say your friend has an animal that has to be unloaded. There's two animals on the road here. One is your friend. One is your enemy. Your friend has to be unloaded. Your enemy has to be loaded. Which one would you do first? The unloading or the loading? Mitzvah besone. The mitzvah is to help your enemy, the one you hate, in order to subdue your evil inclination. Even though what? Even though you would think unloading would take a precedence because the animal's star. If Tzar B'chaim is the Raisa, it's better to unload the animal first rather than afilu hachi kedei lochav v'zitzra or it could very well be Tzar B'chaim is the Raisa, and you will help the animal. But in order to subduing your evil inclination is more compelling, is more important right now than Tzar B'chaim, even though they're both Doraisas, you could say, right? That's present. Tashma, Sone Sha'amru. Now the assumption over here we're talking about is that we're talking about the pasuk. The pasuk says, again, Kisira Chamor Sonachov. You see the chamor of your hated one, the one your enemy. Lying under a burden, and you're intending on stopping from helping him. No, azov tazov, you must help him. So we're assuming that we're talking about that pasuk. Sonish Amru, Sony Yisrael, we're talking about a Jewish person that you hate, not a Goyish person that you hate. If you say Tzar Balchaim Daraisa, Mali Sony Yisrael, Mali Sony, what's the difference? Again, if Tzar Balchaim is Torah, Hashem says you have to have Rachmanas on animals. We don't care who it belongs to, or it belongs to nobody. What's the difference? The answer is me, Savas Hasani. You think we're talking this price that talks about Sani Shamu, Sani Yisrael, and Rechavim? Could very well be we're speaking about only the Sone of we're talking about all Sonim in the pasuk itself. Maybe Tzar Balchaim is the Raisa. The Brisa, when it says over here, Soni Shamu, we're talking about Sani Yisrael, not Rechavim, is that Soni me Savas Hasani? You think we're talking about the pasuk? No. We're talking about the Sone in the Brisa that we just mentioned before, that if you have the animal of a guy and the load of a Yisrael, you don't have to help him, right? You don't have to help him. So we're not saying the Son of Shalom is not speaking about the pasuk. The pasuk says you have to help all animals over here. You have to have all animals over here. But here that we're talking about that the Sony, we're talking about a Sony Yisrael, not a Sony of Gechavim, is not that. Rashi says Sony Shamru Kazaga, Sony Shamru Asana Dikra. Mashma Prika, which Mamkika Sikra, Sadach Vesachos says no. Asana the Mastisakai, Achmas Idleo, the Sone Liton. We're talking about that we're talking about loading, we're talking about for loading. For loading, there we're talking about the difference between a Sone Yisrael and a Sone of a club. But when it comes to unloading makes no difference because it's Tzar Balchaim, and Tzar Balchaim might be Doraisa. So that's you can't prove it. You wanted to prove that Tzar Balchaim is not Doraisa? No. The pasuk's talking about all animals. All animals must be helped. When we're talking about loading is a different case. There we're talking about loading and not unloading. Tashma, another case. Rovates, or another proof. Rovates for a Rathson. If the animal is lying under the burden, but not an animal that always lies under the burden. Talk about an animal that fell down now. Not an animal that every day, every 5 minutes, he lays down on the ground. That's not. It's not a case of where you have to help him. That's his normal derech that he always sits under his robe. Not a Rathson. Rovates for Omed. Not if he's standing. Let's say he's struggling under his burden. But he's not laying down. He's not lying on the ground. No, the pasuk is Rovates if he's lying under the burden on the ground. Tachas maso below mafura. Not if he's already unloaded. And what do we mean by that? What do we mean by that? The Gemara is going to say, what do you mean? If he is mafurik, you have to help him load. Okay, we'll see. Tachas maso and maso she'ach bo. Only if he's under a burden that he can normally handle. If he's overloaded, you don't have to help. If Tzar Balchaim is Doraisa, what's the difference if he's Rovates, if he just fell down one time, or he always says that. Umali Omei, and what's the difference if he's standing? So either way, if it's Tzar Balchaim is Doraisa, you have to help the animal no matter what the circumstances are if he's under distress. Again, Gemara says, you're right. This Brisa goes like a Resigli says Tzar Balchaim is not Menator, it's on Rabbanan. Hachanam Mistavra, it's Mistavra Diktani Maso Shiachalamid Bo, only a burden that he can normally handle. Who's the one who holds that in our mission we said only a burden that he can handle? If he's overloaded, you don't have to help him. It's Rav Yosef Glili, Shema Mina. So you see that the Brisa says Tak Rav Yosef Glili because he's the one who says Masu Shetay Chalabo. Says more Mimasu Makav. So you can say goes Rav Yosef Glili. Baktan Milan Seifa Tachas Maso V'lo Mafura. Only if he's under his burden and not if he is unloaded. My lo Mafurik. You lo Mafurik Klal. If he's not Mafurik, you don't have to help him at all. If he's unloaded, you have to help him load. If he's unloaded, you have to help him load. He's on the road. So it can't be that old pshita lo before bechinam means that it's not unloading lo before bechinam el b'schar. If he's mafuric, you have to help. If he's already unloaded, you're not mechuyev to help him load for nothing, but you have to. You're entitled to get paid. Man shams on the size far. Who's the one who holds that? Rabbanan. So you see, it's a Rabbanan and not Rabbi Yosef Glili. So no. There, it's Shimon argues with Rabbanan about schar. When it comes to loading, he holds like the Rabbanan. When it comes to loading, he holds like the Rabbanan. So he also holds of that idea. It comes to you don't have to say this difference about schar and not. In other words, we want to say that's not necessarily why, because here we're making a difference between being paid and unpaid for loading. Who says Rabbi Yosef Glili holds like that? He doesn't have to hold like that. He can hold it Tina when it comes to loading. He holds like the Rabbanan that for Tina you can get paid. So even though it's mashma over here, below before it means that if he's unloaded, you have to and to load him you have to get paid. That could be the sheet of the Rabbanan, and Rabbi Yosef Glili can go like that. He argues when it comes to if he's an overloaded burden, whether you have to help him or not. But in terms of getting paid for loading, he can like the Rabbanan. Tanabanan. Kisira, the pasuk before said, if you see your animal, Kisira, the pasuk is Kisira Chamor Sanach, if you see your animal, right? Even if you see him from far away, when you meet him, you're close by. You have to run into him, even if you fall far away. So how far away? If you see him, well, maybe even real far away. Then it says kisika if you approach him. What is seeing that involves also meeting him? Shir Chacham said 2/15 or 1/7.5 of a mil, which is like much more than a mile. The zehu ris, that's the ris. It's like it's a certain distance. If you see him at that distance, you're mechuyev. If he's farther away, if you see an animal, 20 miles away with your binoculars, you're not mechuyev. Tana, after you help him, parsa, you should still accompany the animal for up to a parsa to make sure that he's okay. After you unload him and load him, for that you can get paid. Rashi says, after you help him loading him up, maybe he'll fall again. You help him unloaded, you loaded him again. You should accompany him, and for that you can get paid. Just like the Chum said, for loading itself you get paid. So if you get paid for loading, you could say certainly you can get paid for accompanying him afterwards. So the Maisa, the Gemara is not poshet whether Tzar Balchaim is a rice or not, but the psak is that Tzar Balchaim is a rice. It's just not one of the Tari mitzvahs. All right, we'll pick up from the Mishnah tomorrow. Have a good day.
Beautiful.
Questions?
Mhm.